Hello, my beautiful mythical old souls, and a huge warm welcome back. Could the modern crisis facing young men actually be an invitation, a mythical call to finding a deeper, more meaningful connection to life? In this episode, I'm joined once again by past guest Mark Walsh. Mark has spent the last 20 years helping people get out of their heads and into their bodies. And as he says, sometimes gracefully, sometimes not. Mark is a teacher and founder of Embodiment Unlimited, and he's a passionate mentor dedicated to helping young men find purpose and direction in this increasingly disconnected world. Together, we journey into the heart of modern masculinity, exploring the four profound disconnections at the root of today's suffering: body, social, ecological, and spiritual, and how restoring these essential connections can guide young men out of isolation and towards purposeful living. Reflecting on Mark's own transformative past from troubled youth to mentor, and drawing from mythological wisdom and ancient principles, we explore how reconnecting with the body, community, nature, and spirit holds the power to heal both individual lives and the wider cultural decay. Ultimately, this conversation shines a light on how we might help young men return to themselves, reclaiming their inherent value beyond societal expectations in our fractured modern world. And before we jump into all of that good stuff, I have opened the doors to my upcoming Crucible for Women beauty potion. It is the alchemical antidote to the beauty wound. You can find out all about it and join me at bemythical.com/beauty. We begin the end of April. And if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and would benefit from guidance, support, and kinship, come join the Academy of Soul Unio. You can find out more and join us by hopping on over to bemythical.com/unio or click the link in the description. And now back to this week's episode. Let's dive in. Hello, Mark. Welcome back to
It's
the
nice
show.
to see you again.
Yes. Do you know what? I did know that you'd been on many years ago, but it was so many years ago until that moment. I was like, it is a welcome back, actually,
It is.
isn't it?
It is.
Yes. And on a different topic too, which I'm really looking forward to getting into.
Yeah, I mean, my main topic for years has always been embodiment, and that continues. I train embodied coaches. I guess trauma I'm known for the work I did in Ukraine around trauma and resilience. And I've sort of recently started working much more with young men, primarily around life purpose. I see a lot of sort of lost young men, and that expresses in everything from suicidality to mental health to drug addictions, all things I've been through myself when I was a young man. And essentially, I've now got to a point of maturity at 45 where I can helping the young man I was, as it were. That's often the journey. Is your deepest work comes from your deepest wounds, as one of my teachers says. So, I think I've reached that point now, and there's hugely important work, and I'm loving it.
Well, that's what I would love to know, and you've already touched upon this, and I think as you say, that's that kind of archetypal wounded healer, which, I just see show up over and over again, and love that the arc, the way that the wound becomes medicine. But let's start there. Why this passion for helping young men to find, I guess you could say you named it as purpose, and I perhaps would even say it's perhaps a sense of self, like a deeper sense of who they are. But why that passion?
I think it comes from my own journey, like most things. And I guess also another one is I just worked with a lot of sort of middle-aged women in coaching for a long, long time. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm quite happy to keep working with that group. And then I worked with a lot of young women in the Ukraine project, where I was teaching people to work with trauma. And, I started a charity in Ukraine, helping people learn about trauma, because most of the young guys are off fighting. So I was working with young women, which was great. Also not a problem. And then I sort of just had the urge. I kept having coaches, and people would come to my courses as young guy, and my assistant would say, "Oh, you're great with these guys. They love it. They love it." And I say, "Yeah, because they're hungry for someone who they respect, who gives them some direction, who gives them some sense of purpose." In that they've mostly been raised by women. There's a lot of heroic single mums out there doing their best, but they can't do everything. And a lot of the school teachers they've had are women. It just seems to be the way the school system's set up. And on a wider note, we could even say society's become kind of feminized, and they've been told they're toxic and bad and wrong. And the only role models they have are really unpleasant ones, as sort of Andrew Tate's of the world, which if they've got half a brain, they'll look at and go, God, there's got to be, there's got to be something healthier than that. They can see him with his sports cars and all his girls. And I think that's, smart boys got to go, this is not the way. They spiritually feel that intuition. So they were just lapping it up when I had one or two young guys in my workshop. And then I thought, you know what, let's help out. And first of all, it was in person. Like, I've got various friends locally to me, and there'll be single mums or, lesbian couples. And they'd say, look, can you take my boy out for a coffee? And I'd be like, well, what am I going to do? Well, it's a bit weird as an older guy trying to go out for a coffee. But I said, look, I go to the gym. I'll take him to the gym. He can come to the gym with me, because a lot of young guys, they like the gym, and I go regularly, and it's kind of doesn't feel so weird as a guy, And so, yeah, I'd take him to the gym, and then we'd really work on a lot of issues, and, they'd get great results, and their mums would be delighted, and they'd be happy. And at a certain point, I thought, we've got to scale this. So I started a YouTube channel, wrote a book, and, because there's only so many boys I can get to the gym locally. So yeah, it's been fabulous. Been really enjoying it. But as I said, it really, really comes from my own personal journey, I think, ultimately.
Gosh, there's so much in there, and I really relate to what you were saying about those mothers. As I think I've mentioned to you, my son's 16, and all of these things, the things that he and I have spoken about, and you mentioned Andrew Tate, and I think you're right. There's because of his message, and it can seem like it's one of hope and direction and something different to what boys are experiencing or young men are experiencing, and so can be alluring. And yet some, at least, like my son, does at least have that discernment to kind of go like, yeah, it doesn't feel good. But it's a danger of it, isn't it? Because there is something in it that
there's some very good stuff in it. There's a couple of things in it. One, he's saying the things about masculinity but are true, but no one's saying. Right? He's saying things, obvious things like men and women are different. There's utterly bizarre things that society is bizarrely denying. So anyone who says the truth can then mix in whatever they want with that truth. And the second thing is, he is potent. He's physically capable, he's wealthy, he's successful, as it were, with women on one level. And it's better to be potent. That's a step towards masculinity. I mean, I sometimes say he's like a 12-year-old boy without a dad's version of masculinity. So it's it's a caricature of masculinity, but it's still potent, which is better than being a doomer, kind of lame, sitting at home playing computer games, masturbating to porn. At least it's a step towards virility and strength, and even if it's a very crude lower chakra kind of version of strength. So it's not all bad, and anyone that says it's all bad hates masculinity. And anyone that thinks Tate's all good is I think, missing the real beauty of masculinity as well. So, yeah, I think it's a starting point. I mean, Jordan Peterson maybe was the first, but was very kind of intellectual. So I think he almost reparented a generation of boys in terms of giving them some sort of sense of like, hey, discipline and order. And it's very interesting because the sort of mum message is often, well, you're lovely how you are. My mum always said to me, and I was so grateful to my mum. She always said, you can be anything you want and you're lovely, and I love you no matter what. And, Jordan Peterson comes along and says, tidy your room. You're not good enough. You can be better. It's sort of like we need Gabor Mate on the one hand, who's the maternal side. Everything's fine. You're perfect. And we also need the sort of Gabor Mate and the sort of, healthy version of Tate, as it were, on the other. And society is all out of whack, and it tends to sort of go to these extremes. So there's a natural readjustment happening, and I certainly found that in my own life. For me, I had a lot of good male mentors through martial arts.
Yes.
I just wasn't used to being around. I didn't have a great relationship with my dad. He was a drinker, and that wasn't the best. Later in life, we healed that relationship. But when I was a teen, I didn't respect him, and he wasn't always a sort of gentleman, as it were. And it wasn't until I got to martial arts, and I came for the virility. I came for the strength. Right? I didn't come because it was nice. But then I learned discipline and character training, and I was around these older guys who were very caring and had some great mentor figures. I could reel off 4 or 5 like older men who just really helped me in Aikido. And I think eventually, if people help you, the natural urge is to play it forward. So now I've just
Yeah.
got to a certain age. I don't yet have children of my own. I have that urge to play it forward or play it back, to the younger generation. And it's a joy, frankly. And to be honest, it's the easiest coaching you'll ever do, because a teen boy like your son or a little bit older, they're so primed to look at a man who's cool but not their dad, right? Like a cool uncle. They're so primed for that. Like, it's the easiest coaching I've ever done, and get some of the best results.
Yeah, so fulfilling. Yeah, I love what you mentioned there about martial arts. My son does martial arts, and yeah, it's one of those things. I'm so glad I did a lot of martial arts when I was younger. I never wanted to push my children into it, but there was definitely that moment when they both sort of found that. I was like, yes,
Right. Well, it's character training, right? Now, we don't have a concept of character training in our culture. So the Japanese have it. Budo is the way of martial arts. It's not fighting, right? It's character training. And the Greeks had that. And even the Victorians had that. They would, all modern sports were essentially invented by British public schools as character training. Though they've lost, the average football or rugby club has lost that element now. Whereas the martial arts have retained that element of, the Greeks would call it arete, virtue or excellence, and particularly the sort of masculine virtues of self-control, healthy stoicism, strength. These are not bad things. We want men with those. And I just see so many smart, lovely mums who kind of totally get that. They get that they've done their best and they're brilliant and everyone needs a good mum. And I'm so lucky I had one. And they've got the humility to say, I can't give them everything. And if you haven't, I'm a cool uncle for my sister's kids, that's great, but not everyone's got an uncle around. So we've lost that element of the tribe, sadly.
Yes, absolutely. Talking about this modern context, so as you said, you had similar challenges when you were a teen and when you were a young man.
Yeah.
What do you see as particularly like perhaps different and maybe more challenging about where we are today in this modern world?
It's got worse. Same shit, but worse. So, all right, how big do we want to take this? We could say that all of modernity is a journey into psychological destruction. So we live in the best and worst time to be alive. Why is it the best? Because we're on Zoom, we're doing a podcast, and, I've got my Sperry smoothie here, and, you've got your cappuccino, whatever it is, and we're on our iPhones, and it's brilliant. Modern, we're not starving. My granddad had a much harder life. But it's also, why is it bad? Because we're psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually the most disastrous culture that humanity has ever produced. And that's not subjective when you look at the rates of, child suicide is now a thing. Drug addiction, medication, mental health. Over 50% of young American women are diagnosed with a mental health problem. So it's not just boys, it's also girls.
Yeah.
And the causes of that go really back to what could be called the meaning crisis. John Vervaeke, cognitive scientist, talks about this. Nietzsche probably first identified it. He said, God is dead, or the gods are dead, meaning that the world has been stripped of meaning. And this materialism is what's been put in its place. So what does that mean? It means it's only stuff. Tate's materialistic. He says, get cars and girls. This is all materialism. When all there is stuff, all we're left with is hedonism. We might as well enjoy life, because there's, narcissism, because if there's no God, you're God, you're the center of the universe. And if we become hedonistic, we become addicted. I've run that experiment personally with multiple substances and hot Russian girls. And that's addictions of all kind.
You give that a really good test.
If I can test it, I'll tell you. I'm training it on many. It's been up my nose, out my dick, all through all the different orifices. And let me tell you, it doesn't work very well. So, I've come to the sort of middle path of the Buddhism through the extremes. I think, all the sort of Christians and Buddhists and Muslims who say, let's practice some restraint, are perhaps not insane. Yeah, and now I think we're essentially what we live in now, I would call the anti-culture. And it's at best materialistic, which leads to, addictions and despair, etc. At worst, demonic. If you were going to get spiritual about it, I'd say there is a strong case that it's actually demonic. And it's certainly bad for us, just as measured psychologically, sociologically, in any measure you could think of. And these factors of modernity, technology, societal breakdown, loss of the village. I mean, it's disconnection, right? So I talk about 4 disconnections and 4 reconnections. This is what's called the tetrarchy model. So disconnection from body, that's disembodiment. That's where I started my journey. Disconnection from others, that's the death of the village. You know, where is all the cool uncles and aunts that the child needs, right? You don't have the resources your ancestors did. We're social animals. The death of connection to land. I know you have sort of pagan spirituality on some level, and that, you know, that lack of eco-regulation is important, and the disconnection from spirit, which we could call the death of God or the meaning crisis. And those 4 disconnections, body, social, ecology, and spirit, which are all interrelated, leads to dysregulation, because we're not self-regulated, we're not co-regulated, we're not eco-regulated, and we're not Theo-regulated. Just I made up that word. So what that means is we're totally dysregulated, and as a result, young boys just can't cope. I mean, young girls too, right? There's slight differences between boys and girls, but I think I can speak more to my own experience as a young man. Though certainly with young women too have a lot of these issues, and some of them, like social media, are worse for girls actually. But yeah, so that's where we're at. We live in the anti-culture. It's demonic. It's destroying our body, minds, and souls.
Yeah.
Bit of a black pill, Leanne. I'm sorry to be so depressing. That's not a happy message, but I'm not lying, am I? I mean, do you agree with that? What's your take
Oh
on that?
gosh, yes. In our previous evolution, I'm not quite sure which evolution it was where you and I last recorded, but we've kind of the last 2 actually. One was primal happiness, and then one was waking the wild. And very much we were looking at the themes that you're talking about here. It was that disconnection. So I couldn't agree more. What I was just pondering is the way. Well, let me ask this as a question. So more and more I see that, and the very reason that we're called Be Mythical is these are not kind of just random happenings. Like everything that's unfolding is a kind of mythical arc, and it's a sort of story that's unfolding, and it's, as you talked about, there's kind of polarity within it, and there's like a call to initiations, and there's kind of, you know, where things get really bad, and then there's like we go on that hero's journey. And so looking at it from that perspective, if you agree that kind of like ultimately there is a meaning towards all of this, and it's a call, a deeper call for each of us, from that lens, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, this has happened before and will happen again. I think, to quote the great mythology of Battlestar Galactica, I think I'm quoting there, but, you know, everything is cyclical. This is very pagan. Most cultures around there, the Chinese, the Indians, most indigenous traditions acknowledge that everything is cyclical. Western historians from Spengler onwards have talked about cycles of decay, you know, periods of decadence. The Romans had them, the Ottomans had them. British had them, you know, we're having the Western decay essentially at this point. And that's okay on one level. Everything has a season, and we're in the autumn of our culture. And let's see if we can make some of the autumnal nature of our culture less painful, less devastating, frankly. So we can, you know, sort of do another cycle and become, it's like, you know, Rome fell, but the Eastern Roman Empire lasted another 1,000 years in Byzantium till eventually that fell. So there are these cycles and rebirths of different things. And I think that takes the pressure off a little bit to sort of know there's a bigger picture here. You're right. And these are mythical themes. I mean, you know, initiation, you're talking about the lack of initiation of young men, essentially, right? Where young men aren't initiated, so they're seeking death. They're seeking a spiritual death. And others have made this point in men's work better than I have. And there is an initiatory absence that we're this sort of, I'll give you an example. I was on a train the other day, and there was these sort of football fans there, and they were sort of doing this sort of pseudo-tribal thing. I like a bit of football. My family are Liverpool sports, top of the league right now. But it's not a substitute for real community. I saw them really drunk, really aggressive, and they were like 40-year-old guys. And I just thought, guys, grow up. They just look like sort of flabby, drunk man children. And any woman would have looked at them and just gone, yuck. You know, women have always been the measure of men. And any woman would have just gone, gross, you know, like, ew, dehydrated vaginal reaction immediately, you know. So because they're just gross. And I think we all recognize there's something childish in that. You know, and sometimes it's fun
Yes.
to be
Yeah, yeah.
childish and play with
Mm.
toys. But, you know, if you're a 40-year-old getting drunk or playing with Harry Potter or, you know, chasing girls all the time, you know, it's like, come on, man. And that was me as well. I got sort of initiated by my work in Ukraine, really. Traditionally, women are initiated by childbirth and men are initiated through war. Yeah. Or
Mm.
through some sort of ceremonial death, like, you know, they take the boys away from the
Yes.
women.
Hmm.
So, yeah, this is definitely mythological themes happening. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, it did. It was. I was pondering how this episode that we're doing actually links really nicely to a couple of conversations I've had with Arthur Haynes lately. One of them being about the warrior, and how you're right. I think there is this natural drive in men to have that sense of kind of like we're acting together, and we are competing against this other team, even if we're doing it indirectly because we're not the actual ones on the pitch.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's no, so like just as you've said, that that's not warriorship right there. And I think that real stark juxtaposition between the two episodes, and I think that's really, really well said. So I was thinking as you were talking there, how, as you're saying, there's been some really, really needed and powerful work done to guide men into the kinds of deeper sense of self and masculinity. And I also feel, as you were
Mm.
talking, how I don't necessarily know that the way that that's spoken about and kind of who that's for is quite what would appeal to young men.
No,
I was
it's too
thinking,
therapeutic.
yes, and I think it's kind of like perhaps a man needs to kind of live a bit and almost like experience like the opposite of that in order to even like be ready to choose into men's work. Where I'm thinking about my son, for example, you know, it just, I don't think it would speak to him.
No,
Whereas I feel like what the messages you have is much more something that someone around my son's age or a few years older, I think they're much more primed for what you're talking about. There's something in the way that you're speaking and what you're speaking about that really is a gap, as far as I can see, that's really important to recognize.
Yeah, I mean, most men's work is very American, which is a confessional, emotional culture, and it's very therapeutic. It's often sort of run by therapists, and
Mm.
talking about feelings is not something men have ever been big on. And this whole like, hey, men need to talk about their feelings nonsense. I mean, it's okay. It's 10% of the answer, but the problem is not men are not talking about their bad lives. The problem is their lives are crap. It's not the fact that they're
Mm.
not talking about it. So this is it's essentially a feminine approach to sit and talk about your feelings, and often it has this sort of slightly off-putting hippie element to it, which I can get into. You know, I'm a bit of a hippie, but it's not going to be appealing to most young guys. They just want strength. That's why they're following, Hormozy, because he's a big, strong guy who makes loads of money. You know, on the internet, they're following people that have some life experience, some virility, some strength, and honestly, the solution for most mental health problem for young men is actually just physical health. Like if you gave me like a 17-year-old who was not feeling very well emotionally, and then we said, right, we're going to take you to the gym, we're going to do some strength work, we're going to take you outside every day, a bit of nature, a bit of fresh air, simple things, going to put you on real food, stop the vaping, stop the porn, take you off your phone, all day long. So we sort of minimize that. 90% of the mental health issues clear up. So they're not actually mental, are they, at all? If that is the case, they're more physical and environmental. That's the place to start, I would say. It's rather than let's psychoanalyze you or talk about your feelings endlessly. It's a waste of time.
So you talked about those 4 disconnections and therefore the 4 reconnections. Again, assuming a young man doesn't have an uncle or a man like you in his life, what could he do?
Yeah,
What does
great.
that
So we
look
call
like?
this the tetrarchy model because Greek and Latin names sound cool. I've got a Greek colleague. She claimed it's Greek, though it was also the name they gave to the Roman Empire and they divided it into 4 at one point. So 4 things, basically, right? He needs a program. And this is what I got from, say, Alcoholics Anonymous, like 12-step. You have a program. You don't just have a book. You don't have a theory. So he needs 4 sets of things. 1, something for the body. Could be weightlifting, could be martial arts, Could be yoga or conscious dance, probably won't be, but could be anything that gets him back in his body he enjoys. So that would be my first thing. You know, mum's right.
Can I
Get off the
just
train.
slow down on that? Because I
Sure.
think there is something important in what you've just said. Like, probably not. It's not to say it couldn't also include yoga, but I think there is something in things like, you know, lifting weights or mountain climbing. I've got friends that have
Nice.
kind of been much
Extreme
more that sort of
sports,
like,
climbing, they love it.
Martial arts. I would love to talk a little bit more about why you see those kind of things in particular
Well, it
as
has to
the
appeal, you know, like anything with a competitive element or a strength element. Jiu-jitsu is very popular amongst young guys now. You know, that's kind of cool. I think they want something that makes them strong. That traditional masculine virtue of strength is not wrong. And, you know, yoga has got kind of a different association, let's say, you know, too feminine, too hippie, whatever. So, you know, they want to go to the gym. They want to do the bench press. They want to do the jiu-jitsu. So let's roll with that. Like, why force something on them they don't want to do, you know?
Yeah, I really see, and I think again with this making wrong of masculinity,
Yeah,
there can be this lack of understanding of the importance of strength, physical strength, and it not be a shallow thing or a kind of coming from, I don't know, the wrong place, like narcissism. There is something
sure.
in that itself that um there is a deeper meaning to it, a deeper call to it. The fact you called it a virtue, I think in itself is a wonderful word for that.
Well, strength in itself is a virtue, right? Do you want
Mm,
your husband or your boy to be strong or weak? I think any woman would
mm,
say, I want my husband or my boy to be strong. That's just in and of itself a virtue. But it's
mhm,
also a way to other virtues, right? In the
mm.
same way as beauty can be shallow beauty, you know, you can just, whatever, get a facelift or something, right? Boob job. But it can also be the beauty of being a really kind woman, right? Like that's a depth of beauty. The Christian view of beauty is much deeper than just, you know, your makeup or whatever. And the same with
It's funny you should
strength.
mention that. Yeah, there's something interesting. I hadn't quite seen the ways those two things are quite polaric in nature. So my work at the moment
Yeah,
and the next course I'm running is literally all around beauty as
great.
a virtue, that kind of inner and outer beauty, and
Right.
how it can be a kind of alchemical quest, far more than this just kind of surface level beauty. So I love what you said there.
Yeah, men and women are different. Sorry if anyone's offended by that. And these are, you know, traditional cultures around the world. They might have different, you know, Ethiopians might have a different expression of beauty, but the women still adorn themselves. And, you know, the men too. There's
Mm,
nothing wrong with men being beautiful. The young guys actually are quite into aesthetics. That's a thing in the gym. But
mm,
what is the gym really for? It's to build strength and not, and
yes.
like from a
Mm,
stoic point of view, strength of character. Like I was in the gym this morning and yeah, you know, building my biceps as it were. But what I'm really, really doing is learning to work with adversity, learning to not quit when
mm,
times are tough. You know, and then when I'm, I don't know, teaching in Ukraine and I'm emotionally distraught and haven't slept for 2 days and I'm hearing a awful story of trauma, I've actually got the skill of self-regulation, the skill of resilience. That's a skill set that's being built. And boys would rather build a skill set through something that also makes them physically strong. So this is the Greek view of gymnasia wasn't for physical body. It was for every level. It was strength at every level. And the physical is just the easiest level to train because it's the most, if I
mm.
move to a tantric model, it's the most manifest area of being. So it's the area you can train most easily to, you know, if I say train your mind or your soul, well, it's like, well, how? But if I say train your body, that gets to the other stuff.
The doorway, isn't it?
The
Yes,
doorway.
and it's exactly how. Yeah.
Japanese of
Mm,
by the way, any Japanese person listening, this will be
mm,
totally obvious. You know, less
yeah.
Koreans, Indians too, Chinese, but a Japanese school teacher would just be like, "Of course, that's why we do
Mm,
kendo or judo." You know,
yeah. Yeah. I'm really glad we took a little detour around strength.
so that's the first one. I mean, and the
Yeah.
embodiment part is key there, right? As well. So we're not
Yeah.
using sort of a dissociated view of the body as an object; it's the body as part of who you are. and
Yes.
and our
Absolutely.
culture is objectifying, not just
Mm,
sexually. It tends to do that with women. With men it tends to objectify them as success objects, as objects of money, as
mm,
objects of power. So our whole culture is objectifying. So it's the embodiment training, you know, with feeling, which most martial arts are mindfulness based, is a view of the body as an aspect of oneself. So that's a
mm,
profound gateway to the
mhm,
spirituality, you know, opens up. I don't know anyone who doesn't have spiritual experiences who does embodiment work. It's you don't have to try. I have spiritual experiences while lifting weights in the gym. It's just
Mm.
something that happens.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think it's something that we have, and I think some of our forms of spirituality have actually encouraged this, and also the very sort of psychologizing
Yeah.
nature of Western culture. One of my spiritual studies is the Kabbalah.
Mhm.
And from that perspective, it very much does honor the material, the body, as divine. Is not a kind of like, let's try and come out of the body and away from it. It's recognizing the divinity of the body.
It's in the
Um,
Jewish tradition. I mean, it is a mitzvah
mm.
to give a woman an orgasm on the Sabbath. You know, like a mitzvah is like the opposite of a sin, right? It's like God is pleased, you know? So, it's in the Jewish tradition, as many of my Jewish teachers said.
Mm.
It's in pagan traditions. It's in Christian traditions that somehow sometimes have been warped, but they're still there. Buddhist
Yeah,
traditions as well. So, yeah,
yeah.
that's the body part. That's one of four. Do you want to kind of scratch the itch for listeners of the other
I
three?
I would love to. Yes.
So first thing is they need some sort of mindful body practice, right? Whatever they love is fine. And, as a mum, you're encouraging martial arts, brilliant, whatever they want to do. Second one is they need some kind of community. And this is maybe the
Mhm.
hardest one
Yes.
because of the alienation, to sort of use a Marxist word, the alienation of modernity and postmodernity. So some kind of brotherhood is really, really helpful. They might get that through the Jiu-Jitsu club, for example. It might have been scouts traditionally, absolute disaster
Mm.
letting girls in the scouts. They need that brotherhood of young men, and they need mentors, and they need a whole village of influences and connections. And that's not
Mm.
easy. If I'm talking to a young guy, I
For
might,
any of us, actually. I mean,
oh,
that's the
it's
part that
impossible in the
probably
modern world.
all of us are struggling with.
Yeah, I'm just about to move countries, and one of my big priorities is how do I build a village?
Mm.
If only for the free babysitting. But I mean, very practically, how could a mother possibly raise a child without
Yes.
aunts and grandmothers and sisters around? It's fucking impossible
Mm.
as far as I can tell. Everyone I know who's a mum just looks exhausted because they don't have the village to. Yeah, it's not this. I used to live in Africa, right? In like Ethiopia, and you're tired of your baby, you just give it to your sister and walk off for an hour. I mean, someone will
Mm.
give you their baby on a bus. It's like this sort of trust in the village, like, oh, 4 kids put on my lap in the bus, and I'm like, okay, I'll look after them for an hour. So there's a different sense of it. I don't want to idealize our prehistory, but it was certainly there.
Mm.
We are impoverished when it comes to human connection, and everything from
Yes.
empathy to hugs to ritual to dancing to singing. How many times a week do you sing with a group of people? I mean, I've lived in cultures where that was
Mm.
just a daily norm, right? Or
Yes.
drumming,
Yeah,
if
no,
you
I
want me to
completely
Ethiopia a
agree.
lot.
Mm.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
lost the village, and we can regain that in different ways. And there's no simple answer how you do that. I have a men's group that I run. I make an effort to maintain friendships. I make cross-generational connections. It's like but it's hard, right? If I just knocked on there's an old people's home just around the corner from me, right? And I always walk by, and there's a 100-year-old man there. I know because he had 100 written on his door when it was his birthday. And I always wave to him every day when I walk by.
Oh.
But there's literally an iron fence between me and him. He's like locked indoors. And if I were
Mm.
to go to reception and be like, oh, can I talk to that old bloke? They'd just be like, who are you? Like, that'd be such a weird thing to do in our culture. So that's an elder in my literally a few hundred meters from here.
I've been really noticing this recently, slightly different, but it's speaking to the same thing, where my daughter's doing the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and one
Yeah.
of the parts of it is volunteering.
Mm.
And so she and her friend were looking at kind of, okay, we could, for example, go to old people's
Yeah.
home and
Yeah.
spend, my daughter's very, she's like this big ball of sunshine. She's gorgeous. And she's like, oh, I'd love to do that, go and spend time with the older people and, be in conversation with them, so on and so forth. And it's like, wherever you look, there are these restrictions. Oh, you're not 16, so therefore we can't do this. We're not insured, we can't do this.
Rules.
And it's just like, oh my gosh, the disconnection. It's like there's a almost legislated disconnection with our community.
Yeah, part of the society we live in has this. We're what class are we ruled by? The merchant class would be one answer, just a sort of economic class who have economic interests at heart rather than human interests. But another answer is the administrative class, where we have over
Mm.
administrized our culture in many ways. You can't just do what you want, and sometimes the rules come for good reasons, but ultimately we all feel in this cage, I think.
Yeah.
Imagine many listeners feel, it's restrictive. You've got to have a license to fish. I mean, I'm just taking a I'm taking a fish out of the river. I've got to have a license. I've got to have a license for a dog. I've got
Mm.
to have checks. And sometimes it's well-meaning. Like, it's good that we have driving tests maybe, but then you've got to have your MOT, then you've got to have this. And now we're in this like cage of modernity. It just
Yeah.
feels so restrictive. So yeah, that's, the over socialization, Ted Kaczynski would call it, and it's definitely a part of the problem. There's a whole group of society who justify their existence by making more and more rules. The civil service of the British Empire was 2,000 people. The entire British Empire was run by 2,000 administrators, and now it's 2,000 wouldn't even be one department of the civil service, right? So it's clearly not really necessary.
Yeah. Funny enough, my husband is a non-executive director of one of the ambulance service regions. And so he was telling me, I think it's been in the news now, where they've just got rid of NHS England. So there's a body called NHS England. I don't know if you're aware of this. I wasn't. And NHS England kind of take the budget from the government and then kind of almost like subcontract it out to the actual, ambulance service and so on and so forth. But like it is, I could have this wrong. I'm not very good with numbers, but it's like maybe like 9,000 people or something like that. I think I could be. It's a lot of people. And then all of a sudden they're getting rid of those 9,000 people. And you're like, well, the fact you could do that is interesting.
It's amazing. I mean, Elon did this. I've got mixed feelings about Mr. Musk, but he did this in Twitter and other places, right? Like, it's amazing how many of these people you can get rid of. My girlfriend works in the NGO space and they've just been slashed. But a lot of the stuff that was slashed was not necessary. Some of it was unfortunately very good programs that got cut, digging wells in Mali or whatever. But others was just administrators and office workers, and it's not always great. So, that's definitely part of it. So to complete our 4 things, second one is the village.
Yes, keep going.
Third one,
distract you.
So I'm on a mission now. I don't know for listening, but what tells the other 2? Third one's eco-regulation, right? Or eco-nexus, eco-connection. And that might, I just walk outside every day. I do all my coaching calls outside. I go sit by the river. You can get pagan. Like, I like to feed rose petals to the river, but you don't have to be that hippie. You can just kind of lie on the grass, go outside, look at the clouds, connect to the 4 elements. And I encourage, DFE and stuff does that, right? I encourage young people to go outside, and they like it. It's calming, it's regulating. And the 4th one is theo-regulation. So it's some kind of connection to, on the surface level, will be like purpose, like life purpose. There's a whole bunch of exercises I can take guys through for that. My book's got a whole chapter on here's some things to do for life purpose. Like, concretely, here's 10 exercises you can try this weekend. Some of them are like go for a walk. Others are like, death meditation. They're really like a big spectrum. But we need some kind of spirituality. As one of my sponsors in AA said years ago, he said, Mark, you can have any higher power as long as it's not fucking you, mate. Okay? So you can make anything your god or gods or source or spirit, pick your word, as long as you got something. Because we as human beings, the idea of the secular materialist world, it just doesn't really work. Most people can't stand it, frankly. So and that's tricky in post-modernity, because it's like, well, we're left with the spiritual sweet shop. We could be spiritually bypassing. We could be being very shallow, our new age interpretations of things, or we just might be confused because our mate's Hindu and our teacher's Muslim and my mum was Christian, and what the hell do I do? So that is a big question. And I think
again, for
the
all
challenge
of us,
for all of us, not just for the boys. The boys are it's just necessary for them. It was necessary for me as a troubled, addicted, ADHD young man with mental health issues, but now it's totally necessary. I was just ahead of the game. I was it's like hipster depression. I was into it before it was cool, but now it's necessary, and all of us need this. Like, this is the meaning crisis. Like, all of us are going, what the hell is going on? Surely there's more to life than filling out an Excel spreadsheet for some corporation, getting drunk at the weekend and buying tap from IKEA. Surely there's more to life. So that is a question for all of us, but I think it's a pressing question for young men.
And I think, again, in some ways, there's been there is something wonderful in us not being part of these kind of very rigid, this is the religion we're
Sure.
born in and expected to stay in, and that's it.
We have freedom
Don't
now, but we
explore.
don't have
Yes, we
clarity.
do have that. And yet there's a definite kind of, as a rejection of that, it's like, what do you do instead? And so, thus far, the experiment is showing that most people don't find something instead.
Right.
But again, that is a necessary call. I think there's probably, if we look at cultures across history, I think we would struggle to find one that has kind of,
There's
been
very few
something that's
atheist
lasted
cultures.
without that.
Like,
Yes,
almost
exactly.
none. They don't last. There has been attempts of it right back to the ancient Greeks or right up to the modern communists. Atheist cultures don't last more than 100 years. And it's just deep in us that we need something. And as you say, we have the advantage of, you could look at this in terms of like spiral dynamics or something like a developmental system. We have the advantage of not being forced into a fundamentalist mold. Like, my mum became a Catholic nun for a bit before she met my dad, because she was from an Irish family. That's the only option she had. Now she'd probably become a Buddhist nun. I was like, right, yeah. My dad was a man. What can I say? But it's so she didn't really have much choice. She had to drive 50 miles to the nearest Iyengar yoga class when she started yoga in the 60s. So now we have all this choice on the internet, podcasts, everything, but we're lost in that choice. We're confused, always sort of shallow in it. There's no surrender in it. Like, Islam means surrender, and maybe too much surrender, I would say. I'm not sure Islam's a positive force in the modern world generally, though there are many, of course, lovely Islamic people, including in my family. But there's a lot of surrender in that. What they're strong at on is they have a whole system. They pray 5 times a day. They have a Ramadan. It's a very strong system. What hippies do you know that have a system as strong as Islam? In terms of like, we don't eat pork, or we get married this way, and women dress this way, and it's a strong system, even if it's not really congruent with Britain today.
Yeah, there's funny enough, I was talking to my children about this the other day, and they were saying there was something they admired in that that kind of routine, for want of a better word,
structure
of Islam. Yeah, and they were saying that there was like and my son's been talking lots about Ramadan at the moment. Not that he's at all kind of thinking of converting, but just I think there was something intuitive in him.
I get it.
See, there's something there.
I respect it. The disciplined kids are really wanting some structure because they're just drowning in chaos. Now, I would say it's too much structure there. That's a repeat. That's a retreat to fundamentalism. This isn't, Islam is still stuck in the Middle Ages, frankly. There's very few really reformed Islamic people. They do exist, but they haven't had a reformation. They haven't gone through the stages of reformation that Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhism have. So I don't really think it's compatible with the West, though there's much to be admired. And then you also see the growth of pseudo-religions. So people support their football team like it was a religion, or Marvel comics, or woke. Woke is a pseudo-religion. It has priests, it has sacred words, it has sacred figures, like this is like Jonathan Haidt and others have pointed this out. So in the absence of a true spirituality, we will either try and retreat to the past, which isn't really possible. If I pretended to be Catholic like my parents, I'd just become a sort of cosplaying as a Catholic. I'd be a pseudo-Catholic. I could dress up, I could go to church, but I don't really think that Mary was a virgin. Archetypally, Jungian maybe, but I'm pretty sure she wasn't,
I mean, I was having that conversation with my children literally at the weekend too.
You've got to believe some shit. I mean, Muhammad, was supposedly flew on a winged horse from Mecca to Jerusalem. You've got to believe some nonsense if you're going to be fundamentalist. It's just nonsense. Let's just call it what it is. Moses did not part the Red Sea. I'm sorry, Jewish mates. As a metaphor, as a Jungian, Petersonian metaphor, maybe, but not as a reality. Let's get real. It's like the Renaissance never happened. So we are dirty moderns. We are ruined by modernity. We can't really believe, unless we're just, you see this in the fundamentalists. They're like really trying hard to believe, but it's brittle. It's why Islam's got no sense of humor. It's why Scientologists are always suing people. It's so brittle because it knows that it's bollocks.
Yeah, it can't respond to the jabs. It's funny enough, like, just as you're saying, there is such a just an obviousness about it. My daughter was saying, like, so they actually believe that Mary was a virgin.
People still do, but it's very difficult for your your daughter with a scientific, rational, modern mind to believe.
Yeah.
So the challenge of our times is, how do we create an integral or meta-modern religion? Now, I'm not going to be the one to do it, because I'd form a cult and I'd have like a whole bunch of concubines real quick. It'd be a lot of fun, but it wouldn't be. It would end badly, Liam. I'm not doing it. You know, it'd end badly. I'd have my feet washed every day, and it would be worse than Osho. But somebody definitely needs to create a kind of modern religion and there are people who are attempting to do that, because the psychotechnologies exist. We have access to psychedelics, to embodiment practices. You know, we understand the Jungian aspects now much more than before, the mythological aspects. You know, that is the challenge of our times. It's like, are we going to destroy ourselves with demonic materialism and hedonism, or are we going to retreat to sort of, you know, kind of what's that feminist fantasy where all the women have red hats and they get controlled by the men, and
like the Handmaiden's Tale kind of,
the Handmaid's Tale, or the Muslim version, right? Or third option, to those two things that I'd say are not desirable, we move forward. We move forward and we say, what does a spirituality of post-modernity, of meta-modernity, like now, i.e. now, that isn't ridiculous, that your daughter wouldn't laugh at, that we could that we could initiate boys into in a non-culty way, what would that look like? And that is the question.
Yeah. Yes. Gosh, so we've journeyed through.
Talk about the nihilistic death of modernity and the meaning crisis. It's all a bit much, isn't it? And this is why we need a sense of humor. And by the way, the sense of humor, it's not a small thing. It's the test of if someone's retreated to fundamentalism or moved forwards. Right? Like the sense of humor is absolute, as the well burns. We need it. We need it. It's so important.
Yes. No, I really agree with you there. So is there anything new? We've gone through the 4 kind of like reconnections needed. What do you feel, before we close? Yeah. Is there anything else that you feel is an important thing for us to talk about before we end this? Because I kind of feel like there is something so there's something powerful in even bringing these things into awareness. That on its own,
that's big. Just having the model is huge. Yeah. Psychoactive, just having the model. I mean, the really model is the simplest model I can find of, let's make it really simple, of life. Buddhists like life, Christians like life, pagans like life, even sort of evolutionary Nietzscheans with no faith at all, atheists, you know, believe in evolution like life. What sustains life? I mean, essentially, the modern world is a death cult. Okay, there's various elements of that death cult in consumer capitalism, in woke, in Islam, in many, you know, aspects of what we're looking at. You could say, and you know, if you want to get conspiratorial, there's this death cult we're in. Even if it's just saying that everything's dead because it's all just stuff, materialism. That's the basic scientific worldview, right? The moment we open our eyes and are conscious in the morning, we understand that there's more than stuff, or else what the hell is this? You know, what the hell is this awareness I have? You know, that's not material. So the most simple version of this is, what brings life? Like, does being on your iPhone all day bring life? Does vaping bring life? Does porn bring life? I would say no. Right. And don't believe me, you know, I've tested. Does drug addiction bring life? Does being a sex addict bring life? I've thoroughly tested this. And, you know, be gentle in your experiments. Please don't die doing them. But what brings life is the key thing. The best model I have for that as of yet, you know, with all my studies, we actually developed it in Ukraine because it was such an extreme situation that one of these will help. Just doing a yoga practice, just praying, just going into the woods every day, you know, just doing ayahuasca once a year, or any of those will help. That's the good news. And there's a virtuous cycle once you start. But in Ukraine, we needed all of them because it was such a hardcore situation there, and it still is. But it's the necessity of those 4. I think for most people, the good news is just start where you enjoy. Like for me, it was Aikido, and then it became everything else, meditation and all these other studies. You know, for a young man, it might be weightlifting. For your daughter, it might be the Duke of Edinburgh's servicing. You know, she might be service orientated and really get into the volunteering. Start where you enjoy, and then it opens up from there. So, yeah, I think we're going to make it. I think it's going to be fine, Leanne. And if it's not, then we just go back to the Stone Age and we start again.
One way, it'll all be okay. Where can listeners find out more about you and your wonderful work, and also your particular work around everything we've been talking about?
Not on Tinder anymore. No. So sorry. Where can they find me? For the young men's work, Feral Philosophy on YouTube is a good place to start. Just uploaded a 2-hour video on life purpose. There's all sorts of videos there on weight training. That would be a good place to start for the young guys. For the embodiment work, if you're interested in embodiment and embodiment coaching, go to embodimentunlimited.com. There's free ebooks and coaching demos and things there. Embodimentunlimited.com. And the Ukraine work is Sane Ukraine. So they are the 3 things I do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I've really appreciated this conversation again as a mother of a boy, kind of like just entering that whole world that you've been talking about. I cannot tell you how, you know this already, but I just feel as though I want to say how needed it is and how much I appreciate what you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. You know what? I always listen to the mums because I think the mums just want the best for their kids. And every single mother of every boy I've taken to the gym, bar none, has always texted me the same day or the next day and said, thank you so much. And they say things like, he stopped vaping, or he stopped smoking weed, or he dumped his druggy girlfriend, or now he's applied for a job. And they tell me the specifics, right? And they go, I don't know what you've done with him, and I probably wouldn't like it, but thank you. Right? They're like, thank you. And it's like, I trust the mums. Trust the mums. Just leave it there, huh? It's a good place to end.
I very much hope you enjoyed watching that. And if you did, and you're not already subscribed, then do hit that bell thingy and subscribe to automatically get each fresh new episode as it's released each week. If you'd like to find out more about the work we do at Be Mythical to guide and support old souls in this new world to live their own unique myth, do hop along to bemythical.com and you'll find out all the ways you can join us and go deeper with us on your own mythical journey. Lots of love for now. Mwah. See you again next week.